Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we'll be talking about some of the latest remaining moves that Jacksonville should determine before free agency begins next week. So, we're going to start this off by really going over some of the important dates that are going to come up next week, explaining that just so everyone's fully aware, and then we're going to dive into specifically 3 players. You can already tell who they are off of the screen because we've got some things changed for them on here. This is all projection, not official stuff, but kind of what we're going to talk about. And there's some other guys as well that you can throw into the conversation that we could see moves on before free agency. But I would say these are the 3 most important players as far as how they impact the team going forward. In kind of different ways, because obviously with Shaquill Griffin, it's from a salary cap standpoint, saving the team money, whereas our other guys, it's more so about, obviously, keeping talent around. So with that said, we're going to talk about the whole format for this next week. So, first of all, the new league year begins next Wednesday, which from the time you're watching this will be 1 week out if you're watching it the day this video gets put out. That is the day that the new league year starts and teams can officially sign players to new contracts that are free agents. The legal tampering period begins earlier. So on Monday, which will be 5 days from when this is coming out, on that day at noon Eastern, that is when teams can start to call free agents, work out deals. That's when we're really going to see a ton of dominoes fall. And it's really up until that point that any team in the NFL has to negotiate contracts with their own pending free agents before other teams can get in on it. So this is really the whole time period before is really important for a lot of these players we're going to talk about, because it's going to tell us a lot about what's going to happen to them. You know, either they're obviously going to get re-signed, or if they hit the market, then, well, it's probably not going to happen, quite frankly. And so I think there's going to be 3 major decisions that we're going to see. And those decisions could be maybe a lack of decision that we can, it's going to sound confusing. Basically, if nothing happens, that is a decision in itself, right? If they don't decide to re-sign Jawaan Taylor before Monday, or at least before the legal tampering period starts, he might not be coming back to the team. It's more likely. That's kind of what we're getting at. And so the 3 players that I expect to know what the future holds for them with this team by next Monday are Shaquill Griffin, Jawaan Taylor, and Arden Key. Players I do not consider on that list are Marvin Jones, because I think it's possible he could come back to the team after, although it's pretty unlikely. You could throw him on the list if you want. I wouldn't throw Trey Herndon on there, just because I think he'll be a late signing back to the team. I don't think there's going to be some crazy market for him. DeJuan Smoot, I think he's going to be signed really late because of the Achilles tear. I think that's really going to screw up what teams would offer him. You're just really not going to know where he's at, how much time you're getting from him next season. He's going to be a late signing wherever he goes. Andrew Wingard, be the last guy I throw on that list. And I think you could see him get signed before, but even if he doesn't, I could see this team retaining him by signing him, a few weeks from now. I think that's possible. I'm not sure there would be another team that would just go target him really fast in free agency. So, just all things to consider there. Now, we're going to talk about Shaquill Griffin first. And the first thing I want to say is that, it can seem scary that nothing has happened yet, and he's still on the roster, I would not panic right now. Because there is almost no way that this team can seriously look at what this is before. $17 million against the cap, You can save 13 million of that by cutting him. There's no way they can look at that and say to themselves, hey, this is a good situation. We're going to keep that guy around on that contract. It's not possible. It just simply isn't. And so the only way he could really stick around with the team, which I'm pretty sure is like a dead no at this point, it's pretty clear it's not happening, would be a completely new contract where that 13 or so million that he is owed for this next season that has not already been paid out to him, because we've got the $4 million of prorated bonus. He's already been paid this. The cap hit is later, and that later time is now this year. It's finally coming around. I think for Shaquill Griffin, you could see it renegotiated. Like that's something they could have done, but the rumors are not pointing towards that. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen. And if we really think about it, there's no player that Jacksonville has officially moved on from that had any significance to the roster, because the only one so far is like EJ Perry. And that's just because, well, what the heck are you going to do with him? He's like the third quarterback. He was on the practice squad, I'm pretty sure, all season, so not really anything important. So there's just simply not been releases by this team yet. I think they're just biding their time on that. And so it's really unlikely he stays around. Plus, there was the rumor that came out, and it's a dumb rumor because everyone should know it, right? But the rumor was that Jacksonville was trying to shop him around, and if they were not able to get a trade partner, then they were going to release him. And so I think when you look at Shaquill Griffin and consider his whole situation, I get why Jacksonville's doing it. Because look, I understand how bad he was last year. He was awful. There were 2 games this team lost, I would say, because of him. I hate to just throw that on a player, but I remember watching the Washington game. I remember looking at it after and seeing what the Commanders receivers were saying on the sideline about taking advantage of him, which they did after that to go win the game. And I remember watching him get burnt over and over and over in Indianapolis. After the team was going to come back and win that game, just kept getting burnt and destroyed, and all of a sudden, team's 2-4. You know, like half the losses up to that point in the season, you could say were because of him having a complete meltdown on the field. Not mentally in the sense of like just he's getting angry at players or anything like that, but just in terms of his football performance. And then he was injured apparently, and he was not back the rest of the year. So who knows if maybe that played some sort of role. But that's how we looked at this last season as fans. But here's how teams might look at this. He had an injury that could have impacted his performance. He's 28 years old. He's still got time in the NFL. He's going to be cheap. You can renegotiate his contract. You don't have to pay any of that number you take on. Simply trading for him is just saying, hey, we're the team that's going to sign you to a contract. It's not saying you're going to take on the old one, because none of that is guaranteed. So you're going to get that kind of player. You're getting someone who's made the Pro Bowl, someone who you felt like should have been a pretty good starter in the NFL. I mean, I feel like you could find a way to get a late round pick out of that. And there's no harm and no foul in trying to search for it. And ultimately, the only impact that any of this has, whether he's traded or released, is just, do they get draft capital out of it? Because the savings are the same. We'll see that on here. If he's traded, which it has to be pre-June 1st, your cap savings, as shown here, it's the same number. It's that $13 million. So it doesn't matter which way it happens as far as the cap space. It is just a matter of whether or not you're getting draft capital. And Jacksonville's going to take their time, because there's nothing telling them that they have to go release him tomorrow or, by like Saturday night. I mean, technically they could release him after free agency. I don't think that will happen. I don't think that will happen. I think it'll be before free agency kicks off, for the sake of allowing the player to actually negotiate with teams with everyone else. I don't think they're going to hold him ransom. But that's kind of the scenario they're in. They don't have to do this kind of move right now. There's nothing they're gaining out of it. They're going to take their time. They're going to see if they can trade him somewhere. And then once that's done, whether he's traded or not, if he's still around, you release him. And you just try to do it before free agency so the player can go negotiate with other teams. So, as far as what I expect with him, I really could see it anyway. I think any draft pick you're getting is not going to be a huge deal. But it's more so for the sake of getting a pick that maybe you can bundle in the draft to move up for a player you want. I mean, with having 9 selections in this draft, I feel like that's kind of what you got to look for. I don't think this team is in a spot where they can select 9 players that are all going to have an impact, because they now have a really good roster. And the truth is, this team did have a pretty solid roster the last couple years. There were pieces on that team. Not necessarily like in 2020 as much. I mean, there were a couple guys here. But last season, when they were with Urban Meyer, before Doug Pearson came in, there was talent on that roster. There's been talent here for a while. And so this team really needs to find guys who can not only fill holes, but just elevate those spots. And if you can move around in the draft to go get them, that's great. And so getting draft capital out of a player like Shaquill Griffin lets you move around. Whether it's, a huge move or not, you still want to get that, right? There's no harm, no foul in it. So that's what we'll expect there. You probably won't have to worry about much more a week from now. He should be off the team by then, and hopefully he can continue his career somewhere else and kind of get things figured out, because he's a good guy. I mean, I don't think anyone wanted his career to end like this in Jacksonville. Wanted him to be a starter. Wanted to have these 3 guys around as really good players at the cornerback spot, and it just didn't work out. So that's kind of our wrap on Shaquill Griffin. Now, speaking of the one release on here, or moving on from that, we've got 2 guys that we're going to talk about that I already mentioned as far as players that we could see re-signed to this team, or if they aren't, that we'll pretty much know what's going to happen with them. So those are Jawaan Taylor and Arden Key. We'll start with Jawaan Taylor. On here, I've already set up contracts just to kind of show you what it could look like, values the team could sign them at. So this is not official stuff. They have not officially re-signed these players. But this is just giving you an idea. So with Jawaan Taylor, right now, the reports we have, there was an article at first that said he was wanting to earn at least $15 million a season. That was the first one. And there's been stuff recently, in just the past few days, and this is being recorded on March 7th. It's nighttime here right now in Missouri. This is the day before this video will be put out. There was another report that if he hits the open market, you could see him go as high as $17 to $18 million to another NFL team. I think that all seems legit, especially when you consider that players are overpaid in free agency. That's the name of the game there. And I think as far as what he's demanding, it's not some ludicrous number at $15 million. It's not necessarily a team-friendly deal, right? But hey, I mean, he's a young player. He's 26, as we see, going into this next year. He's still got his best years ahead of him. He just put together one of the best pass blocking seasons by a tackle in recent times. Problem is, really, can this guy be a good run blocker? That's all you need. If he's a really good run blocker this next season, say they retain him, it's a home run. I mean, you're paying him around that value and you're fine with it, if that's the kind of player you're getting. So As far as what we've heard about Jacksonville and Jawaan Taylor, we did hear there was some consideration that they would put the franchise tag on Jawaan Taylor. So that tells you kind of where they value him, tells you that they're interested in keeping him, because the franchise tag would have been about $18 million. Would have been quite a bit. And then what we've also heard is that they've been pushing pretty hard over the past week to get him re-signed. There's been negotiations going on there. I think there's definitely the interest to bring him back. And I think really the only two things that could stop you from bringing him back are, for one, the cap space, because there's not a ton of cap to work with. You don't want to be too reckless. However, you can push cap down the road. The second issue is regarding your situation behind him, because you have Walker Little on this team who should be starting somewhere. He should be a starter on an NFL team. Now, the problem is that if you bring back Jawaan Taylor, unless this team wanted to go trade Cam Robinson, which I don't think they will, I understand why it would make sense, and I'm actually a person who's been a proponent of it. I think it would be a fine move. Go get yourself draft capital, replace him with a player who did just as good. Just make sure you draft someone who could be a swing tackle. And perhaps, just throw it out there, if you get a player like Osiris Torrance in the first round, he can play swing tackle. You can get a guy who does both the guard spot at left guard and can move out to tackle if needed. That is possible. So, things to consider there. With Jawaan Taylor, the big issues, like we mentioned, it's cap space and it's the Walker Little situation. And really good football teams have really good depth. They're going to have contingency plans because injuries can always happen. We've seen Cam Robinson go down a lot in recent years. They've needed someone behind him. Walker Little has made his way onto the field every season towards the end of the year. He was playing for this team in the playoffs, even with Cam Robinson and Jawaan Taylor on this roster. So perhaps it's okay if Walker Little is your backup. I mean, you can work with that situation and feel okay with that. It may not be the greatest use of resources, because ideally the best use of resources is to just have your starters, they don't get injured, and you're not paying all this extra money. Ideally, that's the best case scenario. But I'm all for retaining Jawaan Taylor. If he is going to be improved as a run blocker, he's a young player who's getting better, just put together his first really good season since his rookie season. First year with a new offensive coordinator, new head coach. What's he going to do his second year? I mean, that's how I feel about him. And so, as far as what I would hope he'd get re-signed to, we've talked about that $15 million number. I'm not sure that he's going to be kept around that cheap. I don't know if he accepts that. I think if he did, that negotiation would be done. I think a number you could see him stick around in Jacksonville for, it could be around $16 million a season and maybe as high as $16.5 million. I don't know if it hits $17 million because that's about what they paid Cam Robinson. And that's their left tackle. It's a more important position. So, with Jawaan Taylor, ultimately, I don't really know what to expect here. I could see it go either way. I could see this team, watching him go to a team like Chicago. I could also see them on late Sunday announcing they've re-signed him to a $50 million deal for the next 3 years or whatever it is. That's possible. I think you could really see anything. So I hope he sticks around, but that's kind of where we sit with him. We've had news, but we really don't know what to expect with Jawaan Taylor. Now, we'll talk about Arden Key finally. So with Arden Key, contract value is really all over the place with him. There is no definitive number that has been reported anywhere. This is something I searched for before. I've seen a ton of different projections, and when you compare it to Like what he was paid this season to play for Jacksonville, that deal, and what his stats were this season compared to what he did with San Francisco before to earn that season with Jacksonville, you just really don't know. He's got a huge range. And so that range could really be anywhere from as low as $5 million a season to a number like $9 or $10 million a year. You could really see it all over the place. So I'll kind of show you what I mean here, just to give you an idea. So we're going to talk about his stats for a moment. We'll also look at him on PFF. This is some interesting stuff. More tackles, but his sacks went down. That is technically something that happened. Now let's look at kind of his time on the field as well. Look at some of his grades. So 617 snaps this last season. The year before, he was on the field a considerably smaller amount of time, and he had more sack production. So something to throw out there. Now, as far as grades, and not the PFF is going to tell us everything perfectly, right? But as a player, he did get better grades this last season. He did improve. So it's really a mixed bag here, because you could look at stats and say, well, hey, he technically got less sacks. He wasn't on the field a smaller amount of time than he was in San Francisco. Why would we pay him more? But at the same time, you look at overall what he did, I think he was a better player. I think even regardless of those stats, he's a better player than he was in San Francisco. And he's a player who's going to continue to improve. And so I think he's worth a deal that's considerably more than what he was paid this last year. And as far as his deal for the 2022 season, it was $4 million base. That's what the minimal value was. And with incentives, it could have gone as high as $7 million. Now, off the top of my head, I'm not sure exactly what he earned for last season, but I don't think he got a ton in incentives. So, I mean, that's where he sits going into free agency. This is a really hard one to evaluate because we have this huge range on what's he going to get paid. And we also have heard quite literally about nothing from Jacksonville, from media sources. We really don't know what's going on with Arden Key. And hey, to be fair, we didn't hear anything about Roy Robinson Harris before he was re-signed. So, hey, I mean, we could see a deal get signed, just out of the blue this next week. I think that's definitely possible. I think it would be a good move by Jacksonville. Now, another thing that's going to kind of factor into this, and I think this is part of the reason why the market value has gotten so ridiculous for him. And as I talk about this, I'm going to pull up the contract projection that was on the higher end. For him, Jacksonville would see him... Oh, wrong website here. I think Jacksonville sees him as a rotational guy. Like, they don't want him to necessarily be a full-time starter on the team. And to show you why that is, or why I say that, just look at his snap count. We saw 617 this year. Compare that to Josh Allen. It's like 1,093, I think. I just looked at it. 1,085. Considerably more time. Arden Key's on the field about 60% of what Josh Allen is. So he's a rotational player. There are a lot of teams in the NFL that could consider having Arden Key start for them. And so here's what I was talking about with the projected contract. This is not 2 years, $9.25 million overall. This is average per year. So your contract here shows $11.5 million guaranteed, $18.5 million total. It's a lot of money. But I think the way they're considering this is if he's going on to another team to be a full-time starter. Because that will kind of get considered in this. If a team views him that way, they're going to pay him that way. Or at least the player is going to try to push them that direction. So perhaps that's why we have this big range on Arden Key. As far as what I would be willing to re-sign him to, I don't think there's a ton of contract possibilities I would complain about. I think where it gets kind of not necessarily risky, but not super beneficial to the team is when you're getting around like $8 million a year. I think that's getting a little ridiculous. When you consider what he was paid to come here and how he performed, I don't think he doubled his value. I don't think it was that kind of season. I think it was a good season. And I think he will be a better player. But where I kind of have him, I think they could get him back around $7 million a year. I think that's definitely possible. And so what I would like to see, probably a 2-year deal. And heck, why not 3 years? I mean, he is 27 years old. He'll be good for a few more years. You could do it longer. And you can also spread out the cap hit a little farther too. You know, for example, on this deal we've got here, this is with a $6 million signing bonus. If you extend this another year, instead of having $3 million on each season, it's $2 million. So that's another $1 million you're saving this season. And then even your cap hit the following season is a little bit less than what it would be on 2 years. So I think that's a route they could go. But man, I just don't know what I can say as far as Arden Key and what we can expect from that. If I had to guess what's going to happen, I kind of get the feeling that he's just going to hit the market and go somewhere else. And we're really never going to have heard anything about Jacksonville going after him. That's the vibe I get there. I could totally see it going the other way. I think it's very much up in the air. But if I had to put my money on anything, I feel like that's the direction things are going to go. I think they'll go after like Jawaan Smoot again. I think they'll keep him around. He'll be paid a small amount. And, you know, maybe we see Jacksonville draft another edge player in the draft, which would be fine. I think that's completely fine. You just don't want to pigeonhole yourself into having to take certain spots. So that would be my guess. I think one of these pass rushers is going to stay around. I don't know if it's both, though. I think Jawaan Smoot's really likely. I think he's just a late signing for this team to a cheaper deal because of the injury. It's very unfortunate, but that's probably the case. But who knows? I mean, who really knows what happens? So I wish I could give like a more definitive answer for some of these players, but we're really just breaking down where they stand right now. So with this all considered, I just want to wrap this up by kind of going over the cap situation here. Say that you either trade or cut Shaquill Griffin. You make these two signings. And this will kind of go on one of our points from a recent video. Your cap space before free agency, before the draft, and also before you sign some other players, because there's some names you're going to probably bring back on here. I think Jawaan Smoot and Andrew Wingard are clear ones. Riley Patterson will be like a minimum deal. So, I mean, that's not a huge problem as far as cap space. But those are two guys I think will like definitely, I think they'll definitely come back. I think that's a good shot at that. You could see players like that be on this team. And your cap space is going to get worse after that. It's not going to be a huge impact, but it's going to change a bit. And so this team ultimately needs to try to save... if I had to estimate, I think you'd be safe saving about $10 million. Because you also got to consider that every player you add on, whether a guy you're re-signing or a draft pick, is also going to knock another player off this, and you're saving the money that you would have paid them. So that's got to be factored in. So like the draft pool is a few million as far as how it impacts this number. These guys getting re-signed, probably a few million. Any free agent that comes in, probably a few million. And then you're around $10 million. So if they want to save that money, you could see maybe another restructure. I think the only player left that would make any sense for that is like Darius Williams. But I think there's 3 players that I would say I think it's likely they all get re-signed, or more so extended, this offseason. I think that Evan Ingram, is a really good safe bet for that. This team wants to keep him around. The franchise tag was really only put there to make sure that he could not negotiate with other teams. They want to make it clear to him, hey, you're sticking around here, and we want to sign you long term. Now they have time to figure that out. I think by the time the season starts, he's going to be on a long-term deal. So that one, you can go ahead and cash that in if you want. I think it's really likely. I don't think Calvin Ridley would be extended this offseason. I just don't think that's realistic because you need to see how he plays. Josh Allen, I think it's going to happen. I do believe that. He had a really good finish to the season. I think he's an ascending player still. I get that a lot of people aren't thrilled with him right now, and I understand that, and that's your opinion. That's fine. You know, maybe you're right. But he's still a young player. He was really good outside of his big hiatus in the middle of the season where things just were not going right for him. And I think when you surround him with talent and you get rid of some of these big holes that were killing them on defense, like slot corner or boundary corner, it just kind of flipped what the issue was over the season. When you fix that, it's going to help your pass rush a ton. So Josh Allen, I think they're going to extend him. I think it's a good time to extend him as well because the value on him is going to be one of the lowest amounts it will ever be. I think this is a really good point to do it if you believe in him. So I would make that move. And I think one that's also a really good bet, Jamal Agnew. He's sticking around in Jacksonville. I don't think he's a guy that's getting cut. I wouldn't worry about that. And if you extend him, you can save a couple $1 million and you make sure he's locked up for the team. I think that's a fair move to make. He's just a really good player to have here. He's a solid backup. He's a good offensive weapon. And most importantly, he's an impact return man. Not just a decent one, but someone who makes an impact. We saw him in the playoffs consistently getting these ridiculous gains on returns. I mean, more so than anyone else in the league. And I'll take that all day. For the amount he's paid, that's a really good deal. So I think he's a player that needs to stick around. I mean, the guy went to the dang Pro Bowl. Like, we're good. We're going to keep him. So that's all I've got today. Is really where this team sits. Hopefully, I would say hopefully nothing's happened before this goes out. And if it does, then please forgive me. But I'm also fine with things happening because I want to know what the heck's going on. So with that all said, thank you all for watching this. If you've got any ideas for what you want to see on here or things you want talked about, let me know. Really appreciate your time. We're going to have a lot coming out here, especially with free agency. Going to be more to talk about. And I hope we have our first live show probably next Monday night. I think that would be a good time for it with free agency happening. Not sure there will be a ton of Jaguars news, but who knows? We'll see. So thank you all for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.